Welcome back for another installment of Fellowship of the Rink. First of the new year, 2025. Episode 45 is brought to you by our incredible local friends in Waggle Golf, 9 Mile Brewing, and the officially unofficial craft beer of the Minnesota Wild, Barrel Theory Beer Company. With me, as always, Joe Smith of The Athletic, bringing you all your insider info on your Minnesota Wild and Gopher Hockey. We got through the holidays, Joe. We survived it.
Yeah, and kind of surreal is the first Christmas as dads. What was your favorite part about? Because obviously your son's older than mine, so probably has a better idea what the heck's going on. But
well, he was pretty overwhelmed, to say the least. So chaotic week for me because my wife's birthday is 2 days before Christmas. My son's birthday is 3 days after Christmas. We had multiple family Christmases and then had his whole birthday and celebration with family. It's been a lot. And I think he's just like now accustomed to like, oh, people are just going to keep putting things in front of me and I have to like pretend to be interested. It's wild.
Well, this is not going to be the case forever, but I realized that my son loves wrapping paper. And so I could just give him wrapping paper and no gifts. He loved just unwrapping, and then he loved like playing with the crinkly, like kids love crinkly toys, right? So the noise and stuff. So I'm like, I could put a stocking full of wrapping paper, and that's all he needs, right?
Well, the real move, Joe, that you'll pick up on too, and maybe when he's just a little bit older, it'll hit harder. But we could have like taken all of his toys, thrown them out in the middle of the street, and just handed him the box. Like, if you have a big enough box that you set him in, that's all of a sudden like the greatest toy in the world.
It's amazing the pacifier, simple things that he can just play with that for like an hour. I'm like, all right, man, we're way before video games and that kind of stuff. So I will enjoy this time. But yeah, it was obviously fun, emotional, crazy, all that stuff like that. But it also means the calendar year is flipping over and second half of a hockey season for college and for NHL, and obviously the World Juniors going on during the holidays, so keeps people occupied and something to watch during those times. But yeah, it's good to be back at work too, and been at the rink the last few weeks of the Wild and writing stories and getting back into the swing of things after several months away, which has been nice.
Yeah, I can imagine. And yeah, World Junior is definitely top of mind for everybody, being that it's like the only thing that's been consistently on. But people are pretty locked in now that Canada has been beaten by Latvia. That was an insane game to watch. And I think because, unfortunately, poor producer Isha was doing a live stream for the game. He is very, very emotionally tied to Canada's World Junior success. And I think he said Latvia was plus 6,000 to win that game. And if you bet them to win in the shootout, it was like plus 10,000. Wow. And they pull off the shootout winner. I think it took like 7 or 8 rounds of the shootout to be decided. Historic game.
Yeah, and those countries have so much pressure on them, right? And this wasn't a knockout round, fortunately for Canada, but like you heard everybody talking about it, right? World Juniors, them losing, and like in the US had their own issues there too. So I think overall, like just how much pressure is put on these kids in these tournaments. Sometimes it's the only time they'll ever play in it, right? Some guys always wanted to play in it and don't get a chance to play in it. So it's just amazing, for how many people I've talked to in the league, players who one of their most cherished experience is winning World Junior. So I know we had a great conversation with some Gopher players that I think posted audio. I think audio posted last week, and then we'll have
YouTube.
YouTube posted last week, and we'll have the full interview and stuff on our episode next week. Brodie, Ziemer, and Oliver Moore and Matthew Wood, who unfortunately didn't make the team, but obviously has a lot of experience in his past about playing internationally. And I thought he was a really good interview too. I thought, I think Isha brought the best out of him, but I think overall he was. I think he was, for what we're told, is kind of a quiet kid. I mean, I think he was really thoughtful in what he said. People can enjoy that.
Yeah, having a Canadian translator definitely helped, but no, he was a great interview. All three of them were, and now like the bit running forward has to be, like that Braden Yeager goal that should have happened at the end of that game. It's just taking those videos and being like, Matthew Wood would have scored this, right?
Yeah. all the snubs. Yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, there's always several for Canada. Like we always joke, they could have a second team, and that second team could easily be the one that wins gold. It's crazy how much depth Hockey Canada has. Hey, beer lovers, stop in to 9 Mile Brewing to check out their seasonal offerings like Mallet Mike's Rye Porter or Two for His Nibs, a barrel-aged Honeybush Vanilla Red Ale. These delightful brews go well with the hockey and the crazy winter weather on the horizon. And be sure to check out 9 Mile's events page to see what's coming up this month. They have a lot of great themed trivia options. They have different tournaments like cribbage, crokinole, euchre, and a ton of other fun activities that you'll definitely want to be on the watch for. So get out to their Bloomington tap room and see what all the hype's about. But now USA lost in overtime to a much tougher foe in Finland, but USA and Canada are tied in the standings going into a New Year's Eve bout. Mm-hmm. And that's going to pretty much determine who comes out as the 1 seed. USA has definitely had their warts too. Trey Augustine, the one that we saw against the Gophers, definitely has had his warts thus far. And it's pretty much been how far can the BC line carry everyone? That said, Brodie Ziemer tied for tournament lead with 3 goals. And although Oliver Moore hasn't popped up on the score sheet, you hear some of the behind the scenes stuff, and it sounds like he's one of the guys that David Carl really leans on. Like, sees him as a pivotal cornerstone guy for this group, especially when you look at the depth beyond that first line, but just his skating, the motor he plays with. Like, we've heard Motzko say it several times later on in that first half of the season, where it's just like he's literally grabbing everybody and dragging them across the finish line.
He's one of those kind of identity players, right? Guy who typically does everything right, and then may not be like the rah guy, but he pulls people into the fight. Kind of like an Anthony Cirelli type in Tampa. So I think it's very impressive for him at age to be that way, and I think it comes down to trust, right? Motzko trusts the hell out of him in Minnesota, and you can see the kind of coach Carl is, and to earn his trust the way that he has says a lot about him and his future as a player in the NHL too. So having him and obviously Zeev by him there for the Wild prospect, he came in through with a goal the other day. I think Wild fans and Gopher fans have a lot of things to watch as the tournament goes on.
Yeah, and we can't get through this college hockey talk, bring up both Carl and Zeev Buium, and not mention the upset of the year in college hockey. Granted, it's exhibition, so like it really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, but in their absence, UNLV defeats Denver. Who would have thought that a club program would take down what for most of the first half of this season was far and away the best team in college hockey, undefeated for almost a calendar year. That was a wild one, even with the absence of those two.
Even with the absence of them, like, the fact that it was, the shootout and all this other stuff, and like how many goals did Denver score in the third? Like, it was just crazy to come back. And, I guess we talked about this with Mike about NHL, like anything can happen. These things that are perceived as like no-brainer, bet the whole house on this game, and all of a sudden it didn't. So right. Whoever bet, if somebody ever bet on college hockey and bet on that game, they probably lost a lot of money as well. But that doesn't deter me from my belief in what DU can do this year and where they'll end up being. And I firmly believe that they'll be in the Frozen Four in St. Louis, barring something that's kind of crazy injuries going into the playoffs. But it's why we love sports, right? The underdog story, but the things that are out of the norm, the things that are kind of, that's a huge thing for their program and their fan base. And they'll get them on ESPN pretty quickly to get that kind of win.
Well, and for hockey in particular too, when you have a game that can completely pivot based on the good or bad play of a goalie, I don't remember who the quote is, but Jeff Merrick always throws out a quote from someone saying, if your goaler is better than my goaler, you win. If my goaler is better than your goaler, I win. And that's why not just call hockey goalie instead? And that you saw it with Denver last year too, right? And that's not to say that Denver wasn't a very good team, but as soon as that goaltending turned on at the end of the season, they were a completely different team. Like you can play a completely different game and play more free when you have that as your backstop.
Yeah, their goaltending was a big reason they won that whole championship. You know, those couple of games they played against some high octane offenses, and they were completely shut down. So, and it's why the Wild are off to a better start this year, because Gustafsson played terrific. You know, it can cover a lot of mask a lot of issues in your game when you have that goaltending there, and you can also, you know, ask any NHL head coach who survived more than a few years. They got that way because of the goaltending. You know, that's why, you know, John Cooper will be the first to tell you he had Ben Bishop and Vasilevsky, and longest tenured coach by a mile.
Yeah, that definitely does good things for tenure. So yeah, and actually by the time this episode's out, you will have already seen USA versus Canada on New Year's Eve. Quarterfinals start on Thursday and run through I think Sunday is the championship. And for Gopher fans, there are still tickets available. Mercyhurst this weekend comes into town. And I mean, obviously, this is one that you're afraid of, much like a UNLV. Like, please don't fall victim to that with some of the absences and injuries. But that's the biggest thing I'm going to be looking for when I'm out there this weekend, Joe, is just who's back in the lineup, who's close to being back in the lineup. Like, when do we expect to see more or less a full roster at our disposal in the coming weeks? But I think might as well get into it here. Kick it over to Mike Russo, talk a little Minnesota Wild. This interview is brought to you by our friends at Waggle Golf. Waggle Golf believes what you wear on the course should reflect your individuality, who you are, where you're from, your hobbies, interests, and passions. All the stuff that makes you, well, you. That's why every design is inspired by the desire to create a piece of apparel that strikes a chord when you see it. That makes you say, wow, that was made for me. Because in a lot of ways, it was. Ready to get your waggle on? Go to getyourwaggleon.com, throw in promo code SP10 at checkout to take 10% off your entire order.
With our special guest, Mike Russo of The Athletic, my colleague and good buddy there. Now, you could true or false, the Wild slide started with me reappearing at the rink. Is that the main reason why
Well, you did show up at the morning skate unexpectedly the morning of the Edmonton game, and they have won 3 times since, or no?
Yeah.
Philly,
they won Chicago,
Dallas, right?
Yeah,
Philly, Chicago, Dallas. So, yeah, I think it's you. I mean, you were bad luck in Tampa all those years, and come here, and I mean, they only went to 3 Stanley Cup Finals while you were there.
4.
Yeah. Who's counting?
But you know, I was the bad luck charm. But
yeah.
In all seriousness,
it has nothing to do with me, who's covered this team for 20 years and has covered 2 times past the first round. So.
Aside from me, like, you look at this, like, they were one of the hottest teams in hockey for the first 3 months of the season, which was incredibly impressive. Every team goes through funks, right? Didn't lose 2 in a row in regulation until a couple weeks ago. But what things do you see in this recent slide that sticks out to you? Is there anything that's maybe more of a concern than just, this is a team that goes through a rut and this happened to be right before Christmas?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my biggest concern is that when they get healthy again, if they get healthy again, that they're just going to magically be able to find that game that they were playing so well with. I mean, remember, they went the first 7-8 games without even playing in a deficit. And now they're trailing all the time. They can't hold leads. Their structure just doesn't seem to be the same. They have droughts up and down their lineup. Their depth players are not providing scoring. Boldy has been in a major funk. And now Kaprizov's out. So, good news is that Eriksson came back last night. He looked, as the game went on, more and more like himself. And, the Jake Middleton injury, I think, is the most underrated injury that we've mentioned throughout this stretch. I mean, they're 3-6 without him. And he, I think there's a case that can be made if you look at his underlying numbers and his actual numbers that are tangible, goals, assists, points, plus minus, that he was their best defenseman this season. And, he helps their transition game. He defends so hard. He is their best penalty killer in my eyes, on the back end. And so I just don't know how easy it's going to be to just suddenly magically rediscover that game. So that would be my biggest concern.
And he's not back until end of January, right? So
yeah, he's first eligible January 7th. But I can't. He's not skating as far as I know, and the guy shattered his finger. He's got he's not going to be able to get through airport security probably for the rest of his life, but without getting wanded because he's got so much metal in his hand now. So so I just don't see. Bill Guerin kind of indicated at the time that January 7th was probably being optimistic. I think it's going to be more like the end of the month. I'm sure he wants to play now. Like, I'm sure he's looking at things that he could do with his glove and how to hold, but they need him 100%. They don't want him out there not being able to shoot the puck or worried about somebody slashing him again. Like, they got to get this right.
And it's not that Chisum hasn't played well, and like for a guy to be in top 4 role after being on waivers last year, he's playing well defensively. He's making smarter decisions with the puck. So having him to step in has been nice. But like obviously they miss Middleton against they're in the top 4 and the penalty kill in the room. He's obviously a guy who keeps things kind of loose and energized when the funk like this is happening. So
and like Brodie and Spurgeon were so good together, and Middleton and Faber were so good together, and that was a big reason why they got off to such a great start. Chisum, is probably more suited for that third pair role. He, as you mentioned, for a guy that was in and out of the lineup, has done an admirable job playing second pair really since Brodeen first got hurt. If you move Chisum to that third pair, now all of a sudden things probably are a little more aligned. Merrill and him could be in and out of the lineup rather than playing Merrill and Bogosian every single night. They're just, they really could use Middleton back. But injuries are part of the game. This is not to excuse the way that they've been playing. They've just, they're in a funk. But I'm just concerned with their overall play lately. Obviously, the Dallas game, a heck of a effort coming back in that game and sticking with it when, I don't think anybody in the first 2 periods could have imagined that. I cannot imagine how much money was lost in Vegas that day by people betting the Stars. If you are a gambler, that was, I think people thought free money. You fly the day of the game. Kaprizov's not on the trip. Middleton's not on the trip. Ericsson's not on the trip. Lauko's not on the trip. And they wind up winning that game. There's, exhibit 1,000 of why you shouldn't gamble.
In hockey, especially, they probably the
crazy. Well, did you see yesterday? We all live in our little bubble yet. Did you see yesterday how many upsets there were? In the National Hockey League, like everybody lost. Washington lost to Detroit. Anaheim. Anaheim beat who did I gotta call up NHL, but there was just a ton of upsets yesterday. Toronto lost. It's just it's truly unreal, this sport sometimes. Buffalo beat St. Louis. Anaheim beat Edmonton. Detroit beat Washington. Montreal beat Tampa in Tampa. So this is, I saw all these tweets that that the Wild are back to their old mid-league ways, losing to mediocre teams at home. This is the National Hockey League. This stuff happens. And by the way, Ottawa's not mediocre. They might make the playoffs.
They're a playoff caliber team.
Look at that. How can you look at that lineup and look at them as a mediocre team? There is so much talent up in that lineup. It's just amazing that they haven't been better before, but now they have found their game. I was really impressed with how they worked and defended yesterday. They've won 9 of their last 12 games. They're in a playoff spot. It was a tough loss. Their penalty kill doomed them again. And now they've got to figure out a way in what's going to be a grinder of a game against Nashville with them playing better lately. They're going to have to figure out a way on New Year's Eve to get a win before a very tough road trip. The Wild usually don't play well in Washington or Carolina. So that's a tough couple games there, especially Washington is legit. So we'll see.
And you mentioned injuries happen. Just injuries happen to Kirill Kaprizov. Don't happen as often, but they're obviously very under the microscope. And I know it was interesting the other day that Bill Guerin came over to the media room and kind of addressed reporters in an impromptu way, which first I thought when he was going to come talk to us, I thought this was a serious injury. Like, this is bad news, because it doesn't usually happen that way, But I think he wanted to hit the pause button, or, stop the panic button from happening with him being injured. But just what do you know, or what do we think we know about Kaprizov in terms of how long this might be for him to be back in the lineup?
I'm just going to trust what Bill Guerin said, and that it's a minor thing, and that and I believe it. Now, it was very odd that he would come and address the media, because that's usually John Heinz's role. And usually when he comes and addresses the media, it's because it's a significant injury, right? So for him to come in and say this is a minor thing, I don't know, it's going to be a game or two, but let's not inundate Heinz with questions every day. That told me right away he's not playing probably this homestand. When he says don't ask him every day, but I'm not sure if he's going to play tomorrow. Well, I think that meant that he's, when you say every day, it means that he's going to miss a little time. I get the impression he might be at least on the road trip. I don't know if to play both games. Maybe he practices Friday in Raleigh and plays against Carolina, where he had a hat trick last year. Didn't he have a hat trick there last year? You covered that game, I think.
So, yeah.
Yeah. They actually, that was their best game that I think I've ever seen them play there. Usually they are not very good in that building. So I think it's a groin. I think this is a guy that pushes his body to the limit every single night. I think he's probably been dealing with some soreness there. And I think that they're not very concerned about it, but they also don't want it to linger the way that I think Lauko's injury is more significant. But Lauko came back after missing some time and then got hurt again and aggravated the injury. And I think they just want to get this right, and not, knowing that, look, they built up some status in this league by banking some points. I don't think you want to rush him back and then have this being a lingering, nagging thing all year long.
What would concern me more than the Kirill injury, because I think I agree with you. I think it is a short term, not a one of those week to week or month to month thing, is how they've been playing kind of without him, or like the supporting staff here. Like, you know, a guy like Matt Boldy who really struggled, as much as John Heinz wants to push the pause button on it. Like, he struggled, last couple weeks, or maybe even longer than that. Ryan Hartman's in a drought, a serious drought. Some of the other guys that are supposed to be kind of the secondary scorers haven't produced. And for me, I've seen Boldy play some unbelievable hockey. And like 2 years ago, end of the season, he was like the hottest forward in hockey, carrying them to that playoff spot, or along with Philip Gustafson. So he doesn't really pass the eye test right now, Mike. It just seems like he's not.
Yeah, and they're doing everything they can to protect him. Like, anytime you ask John Heinz about him, he gets like visibly agitated. Like, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And John Heinz and I respect it. It's not his DNA to ever publicly rip guys. But so maybe behind the scenes he's reading on the riot act. But enough is enough. Like, you're a $7 million hockey player. You are supposed to be a star on this team. Like, I wrote a story earlier this season that it's not illegal to have two superstars, and he was playing like one. And he is got 2 goals in his last 18 games, and he is just throwing pucks away left and right. He's been soft on pucks, like all this stuff. Like this is where you need him to step up. Kirill Kaprizov can drive a line even if he's playing with inferior players. So it cannot be an excuse that just because Eriksson Ek is out, that all of a sudden Boldy went into this drought and he's being forced to play with Freddie Gaudreau or Marcus Johansson or Ryan Hartman. Like, he has got to play better, and somebody's got to beat that into his head. Like, he cannot be throwing pucks away the way that he is. It's just really disappointing to watch here the last month, the way that he is, not just his lack of production, but just the way he's playing the game, the penalties, the turnovers, again, being knocked off pucks, not holding on to pucks. It's just, it's got to change, and they need him. I mean, he is supposed to be an impactful go-to guy on this team, and he's been absolutely anything but here. And that's disappointing. Ryan Hartman, He's got 49 shots since November 17th and no goals. That's the most in the league. And again, if his line mates could put in a puck, and he gets a couple of assists, it doesn't look nearly as bad. But he's been mostly playing top 6 minutes, top 6 role, and he's not scoring. Last night, unlucky a couple times. Eriksson Ek has that great redirection of his shot, goes just wide of the net. He's coming down on the 2-on-1 with Eriksson Ek. I think he did a great job. I know that some people, it's always the result of the play, right? If you don't score, it's like, all right, he should have passed. But I love the fact that he had a shot first mentality there that was intended for a rebound for Eriksson Ek. And unfortunately, it's hockey. And Eriksson Ek couldn't put the rebound in. It flew right by him. So, they just are not getting production from anybody in the lineup. Their forwards do not score. It's that simple, and it needs to change. So I don't know. I mean, it's really been disconcerting here the last month.
The one guy who's been, for the most part, consistent this year, I think, quietly consistent, is Marco Rossi. And I know you wrote a good column on him last week or so regarding kind of his, consistency and where he is at in his game and where he's at in the Wild's eyes, right? Like, he continues to be part of these trade rumors and stuff like that. But it seems as though he's playing like a guy who wants to stay. And like, you talked to Bill Guerin about him, right? And like, as of right now, it seems like they're not shopping him.
Yeah, and they had been for the last 2 off seasons. Like, Arizona could have probably gotten him for a first round pick. I think Philadelphia could have gotten him last year, maybe even for Cutter Gauthier. Columbus has been offered him and for guys like Juracek and Sillinger, last season as well. So this is not just made up rumors. The Wild had not been sold on him, or were trying to maybe sell high. And that has, in my eyes, changed, pretty significantly here. Now, this does not mean that things, like if he dries up, if the team, somehow collapses, like it doesn't mean it's just a guarantee that they're going to re-sign him next summer and not put him back on the market. But right now, they're not moving him. He's not looking to move him right now. He has done everything that they've wanted. He's not the perfect player. I mean, you've actually seen the last couple days where, sometimes his size – becomes an issue. He as good as he is at the net front, he's not great there at retrieving pucks. That's why he was back on the second unit with Eriksson Ek back yesterday. He's just got courage, beyond belief for somebody his size. He's always at the net, willing to be there, get into it with, Matthew Tkachuk a couple of weeks ago and Brady Tkachuk last night. So Kachuk's clearly get under his skin. You saw Bedard go after him the other night, which was bizarre. So he's got, and usually when players come after you, good players like that, it's that they recognize that
it's respect.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely respect. And so I just love it. I just think that he's just such a pro. Bill Guerin is, he's proud of him. He's continued to sell him. It would be, a real shame if the Wild drafted and developed the center that turned out to be a heck of a player. But is he a guarantee? Like, is he your true number one center? I don't think so. So that's the issue, is where the Wild are trying to figure out where can they plug him in long term if they got to sign him long term, and it's a valid question. I know that it's hard for us to understand in the now, like how you could even consider moving him, but when they're looking long term, big picture at their prospects, at the fact that they're going to be flush with money at some point here when the cap goes up and there's this edict to go get free agents, they're looking at it as like, all right, where is he? If he's not your number one center, is he your number 2? Is he your number 3? Where's Urov fit into this? Where's Riley Heidt fit into this? So, that's the issue, is that they're just trying to project it out.
And what I've loved about Rossi, he's done everything that they've asked him to do, right? Yeah. Like he spent the whole summer, a couple summers ago last year, John Hines asked him to skip playing for his home country, in the qualifying games there. He came early. And I think you said in your story, one of his best decisions he made was, or best things for him was going back to Iowa initially that first year. And I think Scott and I were curious too, are they using like the Rossi model for Liam Ohgren right now?
I think so. I think Liam showed, I think Liam's a little different. He's got the NHL shot right now and he's bigger and, and you know, could skate well and all that stuff. But when he was up here, he did not show that he was ready in both a bottom six role, and he even got times on the second line, and it just, you know, there was nothing there. So I think the fact that he's starting to play well in Iowa, score a lot, I think they want to just let him bake down there a little bit. Clearly they do, because they're bringing up, you know, minor league guys like Brendan Gaunce and Ben Jones and Devin Shore and Reese Johnson and Travis Boyd, and they're sort of leaving him down there. And Bill Guerin says in that story that that's exactly what we're doing. And if you look at Marco Rossi, he says, I trusted their process. Now, was I happy about being in Iowa? No, but I trusted their process. I handled it maturely, and I went down there and I worked on my game. And then, but the best decision he made was spending that summer here, you know, skating with Andy Ness, working out with Matt Harder, getting on the ice with guys like Anders Lee, James Van Riemsdyk, Blake Wheeler, Nick Dowd, Kirill Kaprizov, Brock Faber, a couple guys that I'm missing as well, Brock Nelson. And when you're at that point not an NHL player and you're watching all these other NHL players work and skating with them, it can only help your game get better. And he came ready to play last year, and he's come ready to play again this year.
Yeah, we talked about after the disappointing game Sunday against Ottawa, but Friday was probably the biggest win of the season in my estimation. You know, overtime, come from behind win. They flew that morning. Little did they know that Dallas had an extra heads up optional practice the day before. Wild got up at 5:30, flew at 7 a.m. the day of, like a show and go like junior. And Dallas coach Pete DeBoer let it slip in a scrum innocuously that they had an optional skate the day before during Christmas break, which is a big no-no on the CBA. And now some fans are like, hey, what's the big deal about this? Like, they had an optional skate, maybe they had a half hour. Like, what's the biggest thing? But I think, Mike, both you and I agree, and I think a lot of NHL teams agree, that it's a bigger deal than probably people think.
Absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of NHL teams that were upset about this, and I agree. Like, in the grand scheme of things, who cares? But the rules are the rules, and the biggest part of the rule is the fact, and that I'm sure really bothered the NHLPA, is that when you have a practice that's an optional that Pete DeBoer made clear the young guys know they're supposed to be at, you're also telling these guys that they can't leave town during the Christmas break. Like you know what I mean? Like part of the 3 days is that a lot of these guys leave. They go home to their families and things like that. Well, those guys usually come back to the 26th at night, or they're allowed to fly back as long as they're at the morning skate on their own dime, and as long as they're there by the 27th. So you are essentially saying to these guys, you got to stay in town because we are having this optional practice. The other thing is that coaches run the ice. So on the 23rd, the NHL sent out a memorandum to all 32 general managers that reminded of the rules of what restricted days are. And one of the things that I didn't realize at the time is that you can't even wink, hey, we're making ice available to you. It's up, if you want to use it, you could have it. I always thought that was allowed. It's not allowed. If Jared Spurgeon wanted to be like, hey guys, I'm renting some ice over at Braemar. If you want to come, you can come. That's fine. But the Wild were not allowed to say to the players, hey, a tree is going to be open if you want it. They're not allowed to do that. And so, Dallas screwed up in myriad ways here. One, they had the coach on the ice, but two, just the ice being available. So very bizarre that Pete just brought it up. Like nobody would have known. This would have, if Pete didn't volunteer it to the media. It was an innocuous question by a reporter that actually works for the Stars about Maverick Bourque. And next thing you know, he's telling, we had an optional yesterday, and I saw this guy there, this guy. I mean, this is crazy.
Is this the first time that Pete DeBoer has lost in the media when it's related to the Wild?
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, I think what it tells you is it's probably not the first time he's even done this. I mean, right. So again, it's in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big deal. But the rules are the rules. This is negotiating the collective bargaining agreement. These are 3 supposedly full days off, and they broke the rules. And it's also a big FU to the league because they put out this memo that
day before
the day before the break started. So and it is a competitive disadvantage in a league where you can easily miss the play. I mean, heck, what was it? 2006, I think it was. The Wild missed the playoffs by 1 point to the Vancouver Canucks, or to somebody. And what was the big difference in that season? A shot actually by Pascal Dupuis in Vancouver went over the goal line. It would have been the winning goal. And all of a sudden the league somehow found it like a minute later after play resumed, and the Wild wound up missing they would have won that game. The Wild wound up missing the playoffs by 1 point. It happens. And so when the Wild have to get their guys out of bed at 5 a.m. to fly down 2.5 hours on a game day to play a game, everything should be on the up and up. And I think the Wild were upset about it when this came to their attention in the third period that night, and that's why the league investigated it. And I don't think it was much of an investigation. So at some point here, I got to think that they're going to be dinged with a fine. And the big question I have is Pete DeBoer also dinged with some sort of punishment as well? Because this is different than the other experiences where teams flew on the day before and the organization alone was fine. This was, a coach that held a practice when he had to know after 17 years coaching in this league that you weren't allowed to practice.
Yeah. That last question for me, like Four Nations coming up, you'll be covering that along with a few other writers from The Athletic covering USA. Like, what are you most looking forward to writing about there? Or what are the biggest things? We're building up like the Olympics right now, not the Olympics. It's only Four Nations, but it seems as though there's a lot of hype going around this thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of pressure on all these teams, but I think a lot of pressure on USA Hockey because I think that all of us look at them as having superior goaltending and being completely deep up and down the lineup. They probably also, I mean, not that Canada didn't, but they probably also had the most biggest name snubs. When guys like Tage Thompson aren't make the team, and John Carlson and Clayton Keller and players like that. So I'm really looking forward to watching Boldy in favor there. If I'll tell you one thing, if Boldy was playing the way that he was right now, I don't think he would have made the team. He is.
It was that close.
He's not playing with the FU that Bill Guerin wants him playing with in the playoffs. Let's put it that way. And we'll want him playing with in the Four Nations. So, but I'm excited to see where the Kachuk brothers land in the lineup. How Jack Hughes and Jack Eichel might be the best matchup center that they got right now. How he's playing there. And then the other one I'm curious about is just what happens with Austin Matthews. Like, obviously he's hurt right now. He's dealing with this issue in his, in his upper body. And clearly, even if he's back and healthy, then I don't think the Maple Leafs are going to love him playing in this tournament. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Similarly, will the Wild want Jonas Brodin playing or, Joel Eriksson Ek? So, still a while to get to there to, February 9th is when all the teams leave, to head to Montreal for practice on the 10th and the 11th. But it's going to be a fun tournament. You're right. It's a little weird. We're calling this best on best, but it's not best on best when Team Russia is not there. When guys like Kucherov and Kaprizov and Ovi and all these guys aren't there, they're incredible long list of goaltending. It's not exactly best on best. You don't have Draisaitl there who's leading the league in goals, but it's an appetizer for the Olympics. So it'll be really cool to watch.
Definitely. Last one then for me, Mike, just because we got to get something in here for our friends at Waggle. Everybody go to getyourwaggleon.com, throw in promo code SP10, take 10% off your entire order on polos, quarter zips, hats, you name it. I don't know how much feedback you've gotten, Mike. I know you weren't able to make it out to either of the games in Mariucci, but a lot of Wild brass out watching Charlie Stramel here in person. Mm-hmm. Any feedback on where the team feels like he's at?
Well, I mean, I think that they were really excited to be there when he came back, scored the big goal there in the third period to lift Michigan State in that game. They have incredible relationship with him. Their development guys, Cody McLeod, Matt Hendricks, and the head honcho, Brad Bombardier, are on the phone with him and do Zooms with him all the time. They watch him play all the time. They'll send, from Judd Brackett to Chris Kelleher to their development guys. So they have just Derek Stepan also, I should mention, is somebody that's got a relationship with him. So, look, it's still it's going to be a long process, but they are really encouraged with just the improvement that he's had at Michigan State compared to Wisconsin. They still look at him with scouts' eyes as a 6'3" center that could skate. and they have a lot of time for that. Now, what will that turn into? Will he be an NHL player? Where will he fit if he is an NHL player? Could they turn him into even a Jack McBain, which has turned into a really good player for Utah? That would be pretty cool to see. And so, they're gonna stick with them as we wrote in our article on Stramel. So I think it's really cool to see that he is taking a lot of pressure that's on him, being the local guy that everybody already deemed as a bust. He'll forever be compared with Gabe Perreault, which is unfair to him. It's unfair to him. You could pin that on the Wild all you want, and we don't know what Perreault's going to be in the NHL either, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, we've seen a lot of great college players and junior players that it didn't translate. So, but to me, the fact that a lot of Wild fans seem to almost pin the blame on Stramel for where he was drafted is absurd. If he was a second-round pick and Riley Heidt was a first-round pick that draft, I don't think anybody would be bitching and moaning right now. So, so I think that we just got to let it play out, be patient. All of us, not just fans, all of us have. I never thought Eriksson Ek was going to be this player. I thought he did nothing for me at the beginning of his career, and now look at him. Marco Rossi, whom we just talked about, was labeled a bust. There's a lot of people that if you search Rossi and bust on Twitter, you're going to find it, and if you don't find it, because those fans deleted it. So this has just happened. So we just got to give it time. Luckily, the Wild have a lot of prospects, so they're gonna have the patience to let it play out. Eventually sign him. I got to think he'll play another year at least at Michigan State, then sign him, and then see what he turns into.
Awesome. Well, great. Thanks so much for joining. It's good for me to be back at the rink. I'm sure you're maybe happy for me to be back or not happy.
I'm extremely happy for you to be back. Especially in this funk, hand them to you. There was part of me last night. I'm like, man, I should have covered the Nashville game and given you the Ottawa game.
Yeah, but you get New Year's Eve off, so there you go. So how about that?
Yeah, I'll still come. Got to go see Bruno and Darby and my pal Jonathan Marchessault and those guys. Look, I think that we all just need to. It's the dog days of the season. As I said, we all live in our own bubble. We all just watch the Wild. If you look up and down the standings, there's a lot of really good teams that have a lot of losses. It just happens in this league. They're not the New York Rangers right now. Thank goodness for that. So.
Or Buffalo Sabres, as
Marcus Foligno said. That was funny. So.
Really good. Well, thanks for joining, Mike. I appreciate it, and we'll see you out there on Tuesday.
Yep. See you, Joe. See you, Scott.
Yeah.
Appreciate Mike jumping on as always. And Wild fans, as he noted there at the end, please just be nicer to Charlie Stramel. You don't have to love him. You don't have to like him. Just don't blame him.
To be patient. Patient is very difficult in everything, from parenting to being a sports fan to everything else. So it's certainly, but in this particular case, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's wrap up the episode like we always do, Joe. Brought to you by our great friends at Barrel Theory Beer Company. Keyboard Warriors, our NHL and really anything hot take segment. We got a couple juicy ones here this week, and we'll start with one that actually might have a touch of merit to it. On Russo's show, Worst Seats in the House, which if you guys don't listen, you absolutely should go check it out. But I'd be shocked if you listen to this show and don't listen to that one. But LaPanta points out a pretty interesting stat that we're just going to say he believes that the NHL schedule makers are trying to screw over the Minnesota Wild. You might ask, how is that possible? Since the start of 2023 season, Minnesota Wild have 21 back-to-back games over that span. That's the most in the league. Who has the least? Central Division foe, Winnipeg Jets with 11. And weird, the Wild tend to play the Winnipeg Jets at the tail end of those back-to-backs quite a bit of the time as well. What say you, Joe? Schedule makers have it out for us?
I mean, it's hard to think of being a conspiracy, but their numbers certainly are. There's a disparity there that makes a big difference, right? That many back-to-backs is how many points separate playoff contenders and spots. It does feel like every Winnipeg road game is second of a back-to-back on a Saturday, doesn't it?
Seriously, right?
And then every one of those games, a Wild player gets hurt, like Kirill or whoever, So there should be some more fairness, I think, there. I know it's hard with all the thousands of machinations or making a league schedule.
Totally.
But I think it goes into that as maybe some fairness of it's always going to be a team that gets the most in each year, but maybe they can kind of flip flop each year or whatever, especially if it's division teams and that's the format in playoffs is 1, 2, 3 in your division. All of a sudden you get a home ice advantage versus not. So I would think that the league has a lot bigger things to do than to screw over the Wild and stuff like that. And maybe there's other teams that they would like. What do they do to Chicago ever? Like, what do they do to the sweetheart teams?
They give them more Winter Classics.
So like, and that's a whole other thing in itself. But yeah, I think there should be a more, there should be more equity there as far as back-to-backs, because they do those things. They do make a difference down the line, because those are very hard to deal with in multiple fashion.
Yeah, for sure. And LaPanta points out too, like, obviously there's things that are out of their control when you've got shared venues between hockey and basketball, you got concerts, other events, whatever, but it's just a discrepancy within division, like you said, right? Like, it's okay if like the teams on the East have way more back-to-backs because there's, way easier travel, or, hey, if you want all the Central Division to be hammered with back-to-backs, like, fine, that balances it. It's just tough when that does make a big difference on the team's performance, and you're seeing a big discrepancy there over a 1.5 year span for the Wild versus Central Division foes. But we'll see. Maybe this is all we needed. Throw it out into the universe, and next year the Wild will have 2 back-to-backs. This next one from your boy Greg Wyshynski is a juicy one. Basically said on a holiday episode with Jeff Merrick on the sheet, says that Kyle Dubas, when brought in by Fenway Sports Group, had to have some kind of mandate to sell them on why, he had a 7-year vision, because they gave him a ridiculous 7-year contract, which is not normal. And the vision is, hey, the team's going to get bad. It's going to bottom out. And guess what happens to the Pittsburgh Penguins every time they bottom out? They get handed on a silver platter a generational star. Mario Lemieux, Sidney Crosby. Do we think that the Penguins are going to downward spiral fast enough so that next year they can pick up one Canadian, Mr. McKenna? I
don't know if they'll be loaded a downturn that bad to get that, to that pick. I don't think, unless they get a lucky in the lottery. And they're not going to be.
We need another lockout, and we need everyone to be in equally, and we need the Anaheim Ducks to get the 2nd overall pick and be upset.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think, or the Red Wings all of a sudden get a top 3 pick, which they haven't gotten, in their longer rebuild. So, yeah, no question, that's going to be, I don't know if there's any other Sidney Crosbys or Fleuries out there, or Malkins out there in these next couple of drafts. I mean, there's some really highly touted players, but I think all these guys that have come before them, like the Matthews and the Eichels and the Bedards, and Celebrini's turning into a stud, so I'm not sure the guys coming are going to be that good, but again, it takes a lot of luck and the right timing for that luck for it to happen, and it did certainly for them, and it did for Tampa Bay when they got Stamkos and they got Hedman in back-to-back years.
Yeah, that is a fact. And we'll go right off of that one, Joe. This really isn't a hot take, but we've got to at least address it. Steve Yzerman just made his last coaching hire.
Oh man.
I mean, he's got the faith and belief of the fans, right? Like he is an icon in Detroit. He's got the track record with what he built in Tampa, but you only get so many coaching hires as a GM historically. Am I crazy here?
No, you're not crazy, and that's what I thought. I think when Bill Guerin hired John Hines, like I thought, okay, maybe he had a few coaches, and like this was the one. And I know the Wild have a 5-year plan, and so I think his contract, goes quite a ways. But yeah, I mean, Yzerman, I grew up in Detroit, and he's a legend there. He's a god there, and they're going to give him as much patience as they can. But I think you're starting to see a little more unrest now, just because of feeling like they got teased last year, getting close to a playoff spot, and then all of a sudden kind of really downturning this year to firing Derek Lalonde. So I think there is, if you would have told me that a few years ago, I probably would disagree. But I think considering where they are now, if Todd McClellan ends up getting fired, in 2+ years, that means things have really got stagnant or worse. So yeah, and you have to wonder how long Yzerman wants to play this out. I know he's very prideful and ambitious and everything, and so I don't think he wants to leave without bringing them back to the playoffs and doing that. It'd be hard for him to do it. Not that his legacy would be crazy tarnished, but I think he has a lot of pride in that uniform. So, but yeah, eventually, the patience is going to run out there. Rebuilds are supposed to take anywhere between like 4 and 15 years, whatever like that. But most people don't get a chance to see their way through it. Not a lot of GMs get the way to see it through it.
That's the tough thing too, is like last year they got a little taste. You bring in big names like DeBrincat and Kane, and to see the downward spiral they've been on this year, it's tough to swallow. But I do think McClellan could certainly make a difference. I still think there's big flaws in the roster, but it could be enough to get him over the hump and at least be relevant. And they got a stud on the way, one that I very much thought my Pittsburgh Penguins were going to take. They opted for Braden Yeager, who has since become Rutger McGroarty. But Axel Sandin Pellikka, this guy, what he's doing in World Juniors, like he currently outplaying even Zeev Buyam as the top player probably in the entire tournament, which is nuts for defensemen. Maybe that's the only jolt they need at the end of his contract overseas. But it's going to be really interesting to see how the next year and a half plays out for Detroit to decide, are they going to just do a full regime flip, or do they think they've righted the ship?
Yeah, it's hard to see them letting Yzerman go. And either to have some more patience. But what surprised me more is like the fact that some of the free agent decisions that he's made have been not great ones, right? And so it's one thing to believe in your core. I think they do have a pretty good core there with Larkin and Sider and Lucas Raymond, and like you mentioned, some prospects coming and stuff like that. But you got to find the right support players, and the ones that some of the free agent signings like the Tarasenko's and everything of the world haven't turned out the way they needed to. And so aside from David Perron, who was pretty good for them, but like a lot of the guys have been kind of misses there. And Wallman, they traded and gave away picks to get away, so he hasn't batted 100. So we'll see what happens there.
For sure. And last one here, Joe, this one, bit more of a stretch. You probably will smack me in the nose for it, but Fanatics, how Fanatics stole Christmas. I'm convinced at this point that they have to be intentionally messing up some of this gear just so that people will talk about them and they will be in like the news cycle on socials, because there's no way that you can mess up this much gear this badly, especially like around Christmas time. It's insane how they keep on messing up people's apparel. It's nuts.
What is the old saying? Like, the no such thing as bad publicity, I guess. But
someone took that way too seriously.
Yeah, I mean, I know they have contracts and stuff, and so they have the ability to, still run these things out. But definitely not people's favorites as far as the apparel companies for all these different places. So,
and people are still buying from them somehow. Like maybe word hasn't gotten around enough. But like there was the first one I saw was a Wild like crew neck where the Wild logo's upside down on the chest. I've seen players where the numbers got switched around. I've seen players where the numbers are completely wrong. I've seen names spelled wrong. There was even one, I think the funniest one was, it was an Eagles. I might have this backwards. I think it was a Detroit jersey, NFL, Detroit Lions. And where it's usually says Lions, like that little right in the chest, it said Eagles. And maybe it was the other way around. Maybe it was an Eagles jersey that said Lions in small print there, like right in the little V. But like, how do you mess that? Like, that's an intentional, egregious error.
Yeah, I mean, and that's on a massive amount of jerseys, So, yeah, I I'm old school. Some of the old apparel companies and ones like grew up in Michigan fan, and so like Nike did all the Wolverine stuff, you know.
Sure.
So, but Fanatics hasn't really grown a lot of people yet. So.
Bring back Starter.
Starter, old school.
Don't fix everything.
Who did the triple fat goose jackets? Was that Starter? The triple fat goose winter jackets. I don't know if they're big in Minnesota or not. But
goose. Now I gotta look that up.
Yeah, like the very warm, puffy like sports jackets. You know.
There's literally a website called triplefatgoose.com. Premium goose down jackets. So maybe that's just what it was. Triple fat goose.
You could probably order them still. So, but yeah, be perfect for Minnesota.
I have to dabble on that more. But yeah, just crazy to me. But all right, there's a smattering of hot takes across this night. We don't even have to give it any credence, but I was even going to say, like, Zeev Boyum's just going to get all of the NIL money thrown at him to stay for one more year after Denver getting decimated by UNLV, but it's not happening. He's leaving as soon as the season's over. We all know it.
Yeah.
I did think it was interesting, though, that Russo is pretty confident Stramel will be going back for his senior year.
I think that's kind of the plan for right now. Like, I mean, if there's not really any rush, and like the key is for what's better for him playing there or playing in Iowa, you know.
I like him going back there personally.
Yeah. I don't know. He can develop. They have a really good program. They have really good coaching. Like, you play high leverage situations. You play less games, of course, but I think it's a great. I think for his development, give another year there. If he was blowing people away the first couple of years, and like all of a sudden, hey, he's ready to go, but you know, they still have to sign him, right? You know, entry-level deal. So
yeah.
Give it some time.
For sure. Well, what do we have coming up here the next week or so, Joe? What do people need to be checking out from you and Russo on The Athletic?
Well, there's already have run by the time this pod comes out Wednesday, but I'm writing Declan Chisum, a feature about him, kind of his backstory and stuff like that. And obviously for a guy who was on waivers last year, now playing a top 4 role, kind of how he kind of got there. So that'll run on Tuesday, so the day before this pod comes out. Mike mentioned he's on the road trip this weekend, and I'll be on a lot of road trips coming up in January. So we'll be taking turns, you know, doing some features, analysis, columns, you know, whether it's on Boldy or Kirill or the team in general. So working on some things. We'll tease it when they're more closer to being ready. But I'm working on some national stories too. So related to the NHLPA. So more stuff like that coming as well.
Awesome. Well, everyone, make sure if you haven't already, go subscribe to The Athletic. I'm sure if you check out any of Russo or Joe's stories, there's usually some kind of promo that they're throwing around, especially at the beginning of the year. Get in, check them out. And everyone, just appreciate you listening. Continued support here as we keep on getting more and more listeners every week. But if you're new, subscribe. 5 stars. It all helps us. You can check us out on YouTube at The Soda Pod. Otherwise, we'll be back here next week with hopefully better news on the Wild front, a little bit less downward spiral, and hopefully, I mean, we're hoping, fingers crossed now, that Kaprizov is going to be back soon. So hopefully that's all it takes.
Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it. Have a good week. Happy New Year.